Imagine standing on the shore of your village on a grey morning in 821, watching the horizon with growing dread. Your husband, along with every man capable of holding a weapon, has positioned himself between your home and the dragon-headed ships that appeared at dawn. You can hear the clash of metal, the screams of dying men, the battle cries in a language you don't understand. And then, suddenly, the sounds change. The fighting stops. The screaming doesn't. When the smoke clears and the Vikings stride through the rubble of what was once your world, you realize with sickening certainty that your life as you knew it has ended. Your husband lies among the fallen, and you, along with every other woman in the village, have become something else entirely. Not widows, not survivors, property. This is the story the history books rarely tell. The story of what happened to the wives, daughters and sisters of defeated warriors in the Viking Age. A fate so brutal, so systematic, and so economically calculated that it would shape the demographics of entire nations and fuel 3 centuries of Viking expansion across Europe. By the time you understand what awaits you, there will be no escape. The Vikings have already decided your value, your destination, and your future. And that future looks nothing like the life you woke up to this morning. Before we journey deeper into this dark chapter of history, if stories like this fascinate you, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. And once you reach the moment that unsettles you most, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Let's begin. The Viking Age, spanning roughly from 790 to 1100, was not simply an era of exploration and adventure as popular culture often portrays. It was, at its core, an economic system built on violence and human trafficking. When we think of Vikings today, we imagine fierce warriors in horned helmets, setting sail for glory and treasure. But the historical reality was far more calculated, far more brutal, and far more focused on one particular commodity than most people realize. That commodity was people, specifically women. Archaeological evidence and historical chronicles tell us that slavery formed a cornerstone of Viking society. Researchers estimate that enslaved people, called thralls in Old Norse, comprised anywhere from 10 to 25% of Scandinavia's population during the Viking Age. These weren't people who had fallen into debt or been born into servitude within Viking communities, though that happened too. The vast majority were captured during raids, torn from their homes in violent attacks that left their protectors dead and their communities in ruins. The Annals of Ulster, an early medieval Irish chronicle, provides one of the most chilling records of this practice. In the year 821, the document records that Howth, near Dublin, was raided by Vikings who carried off a great booty of women into captivity. Not gold, not livestock, women. The chronicle makes it clear what the Vikings valued most. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was standard practice. By the mid-9th century, raids had escalated dramatically. In 869, Vikings carried off more than 1,000 people in a single attack on Armagh in Ireland. The scale of this human trafficking operation was staggering, systematic, and specifically targeted. But why women? Why did Viking raiding parties prioritize female captives over male prisoners or material wealth? The answer reveals something deeply disturbing about Viking society and the economic calculations that drove their expansion across Europe. The shortage of women in Scandinavian society wasn't accidental. It was a consequence of Viking social structure. Polygyny and concubinage were widely practiced among the Viking elite. Wealthy jarls and chieftains maintained multiple wives and numerous concubines, monopolizing the available women in their communities. This left poorer unmarried men with virtually no chance of securing a bride within their own society. The class system ensured that women of marriageable age were already claimed by men of higher status. This created what modern researchers call an operational sex ratio imbalance. There were more men seeking wives than there were women available to marry them. For young Viking men of lower status, the path to marriage was blocked not by lack of desire, but by lack of resources. They couldn't compete with the wealthy landowners who could afford bride prices and maintain multiple households. So, they went raiding. This pattern suggests that the shortage of available women within Viking society created strong incentives for raiding and capturing women from other lands. Researchers studying polygynous societies have found they consistently show higher rates of male violence and risk-taking behavior, which could help explain why Viking raids were so persistent and widespread. But captured women served another purpose beyond becoming wives for unmarried Vikings. They were valuable commodities in a thriving international slave trade. Viking merchants transported enslaved people along vast trade routes stretching from Ireland in the west to Constantinople in the east, from the British Isles south to the Islamic Caliphate. The Arab geographer Ibn Hawqal, writing in 977, described a Viking slave trade that extended across the Mediterranean from Spain to Egypt. Based on documentary evidence and archaeological findings, these weren't small-scale operations. This was industrial-level human trafficking that sustained Viking expansion for centuries. Female slaves held particular value for several reasons. First, they possessed skills that Viking society desperately needed. Textile production, a labor-intensive and essential industry in the Viking Age, was traditionally women's work. A captured woman who could weave, spin, and produce cloth was worth her weight in silver. Second, they could be used for domestic labor, managing households while men went on extended voyages. Third, and perhaps most significantly, they could bear children, increasing the enslaver's property and labor force. But the most profitable use for many female captives was sexual. Enslaved women became concubines, forced to provide sexual services to their captors. The sources are brutally clear about this. Ahmad ibn Fadlan, an Arab diplomat who encountered Viking merchants along the Volga River in 921, wrote with disgust about the Vikings' treatment of female slaves. He described how Viking traders would have intercourse with enslaved women in full view of other men, treating them as objects for public use. These women had no privacy, no dignity, no control over their own bodies. The moment of capture would have been utterly terrifying. Imagine you're that woman on the shore watching the Vikings approach. Your husband is dead. Your sons, if old enough to fight, are likely dead too. The younger children are screaming. The Vikings are methodical in their selection. They're not interested in the elderly or the very young boys. They want women of childbearing age, girls approaching puberty, and young children who can be raised as thralls. You're grabbed, your hands bound with rough rope that cuts into your wrists. You're herded with other captured women toward the longships, stumbling over the bodies of men you knew your entire life. The Vikings work quickly. They know that delays invite counterattacks from neighboring settlements. Within hours of the raid's conclusion, you're aboard a Viking ship, pressed together with dozens of other captives in conditions barely fit for cargo. The voyage itself is a nightmare. You have no idea where you're going. Some captives are kept by the raiders themselves, but most are destined for slave markets. The Vikings maintained an extensive network of trading posts where human cargo could be bought and sold. Two major routes carried enslaved people from Viking raids to distant markets. The western route led captured Celts and Anglo-Saxons from the British Isles to Dublin, which became a major slave trading hub, or further south to markets in Islamic Spain. The eastern route was even more extensive. Captives were transported along the rivers of Eastern Europe through what is now Russia and Ukraine to markets in Constantinople, Baghdad, and Central Asia. Arab merchants paid premium prices for European slaves, particularly young women and educated men. Some male captives were even castrated to serve as eunuchs in the courts of the Islamic world, a fate recorded in multiple sources. The journey could take weeks or months. Shackles discovered at archaeological sites in Birka, Hedeby, and other Viking trading centers tell us how captives were restrained during transport. Iron collars around the neck, chains connecting multiple prisoners together, locks and keys to prevent escape. The archaeological record also reveals something else. The skeletal remains of presumed thralls show signs of malnutrition, physical abuse, and violent deaths. Anna Kjellström, an archaeologist at Stockholm University, examined the bones of enslaved people found in Viking-era graves. Her findings are disturbing. Many showed evidence of decapitation. Some had been buried alongside their owners, sacrificed at the time of their master's death. Others showed signs of chronic abuse, healed fractures, and dietary deficiencies indicating they received less food than free Vikings. Their teeth revealed they ate primarily fish, while their masters enjoyed meat and dairy products. Life as a thrall was, by all accounts, brutal. Female thralls performed the hardest and most unpleasant labor on farms and in households. They worked in the fields, tended livestock, cooked, cleaned, and managed domestic tasks. But unlike free women in Viking society, who had legal rights and could own property, enslaved women owned nothing, not even themselves. They could not refuse any demand made of them, and the demands made of female thralls extended far beyond labor. Sexual exploitation was not an unfortunate side effect of enslavement, it was central to the institution itself. Enslaved women were expected to provide sexual services to their owners. This wasn't hidden or considered shameful by Viking standards. It was openly practiced and legally sanctioned. The Norse sagas, medieval Icelandic stories based on earlier oral traditions, frequently mention thralls being used for sex. Some sources even suggest this was done publicly, without privacy or discretion. The archaeological evidence supports what the written sources tell us. DNA studies of Iceland's founding population reveal a striking pattern. Analysis of ancient Icelandic genomes shows that the first settlers had roughly equal Norse and Gaelic ancestry. But when we look at which ancestors contributed what, the picture becomes disturbing. Studies of mitochondrial DNA, which traces maternal lineage, found that approximately 62% of Iceland's female founding population had Gaelic origins from Ireland or Scotland. Meanwhile, studies of Y chromosomes, which trace paternal lineage, show that roughly 80% of the male founding population had Nordic origins. The inference is clear and deeply uncomfortable. Nordic men colonized Iceland with women captured in raids on the British Isles. These women didn't migrate voluntarily as wives. Based on what we know of Viking raiding practices and the historical record of systematic captive taking, they were taken, enslaved, and forced to bear children to their captors. The children born to enslaved mothers occupied an ambiguous position in Viking society. The sagas and legal texts indicate that if a free man acknowledged a child born to his thrall, that child could potentially inherit property and might eventually gain freedom. But this was entirely at the father's discretion. An unacknowledged child remained a slave, born into the same bondage as their mother. The system, based on what legal codes and saga evidence suggests, was designed to perpetuate itself, ensuring a steady supply of unfree labor across generations. For a woman who found herself enslaved, the future held few hopeful possibilities. Some thralls could theoretically buy their freedom. A few sources mention enslaved people being allowed to keep a small portion of the profits from goods they sold on their master's behalf. Over many years, a thrall might accumulate enough to purchase freedom, but this was extremely rare, more an exception that proved the rule than a realistic path for most. Manumission, being freed by one's owner, was another possibility that appears in the historical record. Some Vikings freed elderly thralls, or those who had served faithfully for many years. Runestones from the period occasionally commemorate such acts. One stone in Jutland reads, "Toki Smith raised the stone in memory of Thorgisel Gudmundar's son, who gave him gold and freedom." But even freed thralls never achieved full equality with freeborn Vikings. According to legal codes, they remained obligated to their former owners and held lower legal status. It typically took at least 2 generations for freedmen's descendants to attain the full rights of the freeborn. The darkest fate awaited those whose owners died. Viking funerals for wealthy men sometimes included human sacrifice. Ibn Fadlan's account of a Viking chieftain's funeral on the Volga River in 921 or 922 provides the most detailed description we have of this practice, and it remains one of the most disturbing passages in historical literature. When a wealthy Viking died, his female slaves were asked a question: "Who among you will die with him?" The woman who volunteered or was selected would spend the days before the funeral being treated well, dressed in fine clothes, and given alcohol constantly. Ibn Fadlan describes her being kept in what appears to be a stupefied state through continuous drinking. On the day of the cremation, the woman would be brought to the dead chieftain's ship, which had been prepared as a funeral pyre. What happened next is almost unbearable to recount, but it happened, and based on archaeological evidence, it happened repeatedly across the Viking world. Ibn Fadlan describes how 6 men, companions of the deceased chieftain, engaged in ritual intercourse with the enslaved woman as part of the ceremony. This wasn't done in private, it was performed in front of witnesses as part of the funeral ritual. After this, the woman was brought into a pavilion on the ship where the dead chieftain lay. An old woman, whom Ibn Fadlan calls the Angel of Death, strangled the woman with a cord while simultaneously stabbing her repeatedly. The screams were so terrible that funeral attendees banged their shields to drown out the sounds, preventing other enslaved women from becoming too frightened to volunteer in the future. The woman's body was then placed beside her master, and the entire ship was set ablaze. The Vikings watching told Ibn Fadlan they considered this a mercy, that the wind would carry her soul to paradise quickly. Ibn Fadlan, coming from Islamic culture where slavery also existed but operated under different customs, was deeply disturbed by what he witnessed. Archaeological evidence confirms this practice occurred beyond Ibn Fadlan's single account. On the Isle of Man, a wealthy Viking's grave contained the remains of a young woman who had been killed by a savage blow to the top of her head. Her remains were mixed with the cremated remains of animals, and her body showed signs of mistreatment during life. Similar graves with evidence of human sacrifice have been found across Scandinavia, particularly in high-status burials, indicating this wasn't an isolated cultural practice of one particular group, but a broader tradition among certain Viking communities. For the enslaved women who survived, who weren't sacrificed at their owner's death, and who didn't manage to buy or earn their freedom, life continued in bondage. They grew old as thralls if they lived long enough, performing back-breaking labor until their bodies gave out. When they died, they were often buried without ceremony, their graves unmarked or minimally identified. Archaeological investigations have revealed that thralls received significantly less elaborate burials than free Vikings. Some burial sites suggest enslaved people may have been left without proper burial rites, based on the positioning and treatment of remains that differ markedly from those of free individuals. The introduction of Christianity to Scandinavia, beginning in earnest in the 10th century, slowly began to change these practices. The Church opposed slavery, particularly the enslavement of fellow Christians. Christian laws explicitly forbade the enslavement of Christians by other Christians. As Christian conversion spread through Scandinavia in the 11th century, it became increasingly difficult to acquire new slaves from what was now largely Christian Europe. Gradually, over the course of the 12th and 13th centuries, thraldom declined in Scandinavian society. The practice was phased out in Denmark during the 12th century, in Norway by 1274, and in Iceland by the late 12th century. Sweden formally abolished slavery in its last remaining counties in 1335, though by that point few, if any, thralls remained in Scandinavian society. But the women who suffered through those centuries of Viking expansion left no written records. We don't have their words, their thoughts, their feelings. We have only the archaeological evidence of their bones, the chains that bound them, and the graves where they were thrown after death. We have the clinical descriptions written by men like Ibn Fadlan, who witnessed their suffering but could do nothing to prevent it. And we have the demographic legacy, visible in the DNA of modern populations, showing that thousands upon thousands of women were taken from their homes and forced to build new Viking settlements in foreign lands. The terrifying fate of defeated warriors' wives in the Viking Age wasn't an accident of war. It wasn't collateral damage. It was the entire point. Viking raids were economic ventures, and women were the most valuable commodity. The system was calculated, systematic, and sustained for 300 years. It shaped the development of medieval Europe, influenced the genetic makeup of entire nations, and destroyed countless individual lives. These women deserve to be remembered, not as footnotes in stories about Viking conquest, not as nameless victims in tales of adventure and exploration, but as real people who suffered unspeakable horrors. They were mothers who watched their children enslaved. They were daughters who saw their fathers killed. They were wives who witnessed their husbands' deaths and then faced a future worse than death. Their silence in the historical record speaks volumes about whose stories were considered worth preserving. If this video opened your eyes to a dark chapter of history that isn't often discussed, please hit that like button and subscribe to the Codex of History. History isn't always glorious, but it's always worth knowing. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.